Hello everyone, and welcome back to the garage. In this video, we are going to be doing part 3 of the Gottlieb Jungle Queen pinball machine restoration series. In this video, we will be doing the Playfield restoration because that is the last thing that this machine needs before it is all mechanically working and good to go. So, let's get started. So here is a before shot of the Playfield before I did anything to it at all. So just to recap what I'm going to be doing to this Playfield, I'm going to be replacing all of the rubbers with nice new ones. I'm going to be upgrading all of the incandescent bulbs to warm white LEDs, and I'm going to be taking most of the parts off of this Playfield so that I can strip it down, clean it up, and give it a coat of wax so that the ball rolls very smooth on it. I'm also going to be replacing some parts. The bumper cap here is broken on one side, and I have a new one of those. And I'm also going to replace the bumper housing here because, as you can see, a lot of the paint has come off. So this is going to get replaced with a new one. These two bumpers are fine to leave alone because they don't have nearly as much of that paint loss, and their caps are just fine. So those will get left alone. And I'm also going to be replacing some of the white plastic posts because some of them are just generic replacement posts and some are the wrong size. For example, if you look at these posts here, these are original posts, and I know it's kind of hard to tell on camera, but they're not completely round. They're carved out to kind of look like a jewel. These are called jeweled posts. But if you look at the posts here, these are completely round posts. They are not jeweled, and one of those posts is the wrong size. So you can see there's a little bit of a bend in this plastic. So I bought some of the correct sized jeweled posts to put in this machine. So all of those incorrect posts are going to get replaced because there's quite a few of those in here. And I'm also going to be replacing all of these little white rubber caps because a lot of them have turned hard. And some of the ones up at the top are just little Playfield rubbers, as you can see. So I need to replace those with the proper rubber cap. And then I'm going to see if I can fix the cosmetics of this metal piece up here. You can see at some point there was either a sticker or a piece of tape going across this, and so it's made the top part of the paint look kind of bad. So I'll see what I can do to clean that up a little bit. And then the apron, I'm going to be using my heat gun to remove this little piece of tape that's here for who knows what reason. I'm going to be replacing both of the cards that go here because this one is a badly made photocopy and this one's missing. I already showed you my replacement cards in part 2 of this series, so that's going to get done. I'm also going to remove the apron and clean up underneath because I'm sure it's dirty under there. And I thought about replacing the drop targets, but I think I'm going to leave them in for now because they're still in reasonably good condition. They're a little bit worn, but it's not terrible. The ones on this side are better. And I did try to order some decals. I know these targets don't have decals from the factory, but the website I tried to order them from, I couldn't get any emails through to them, and they're an email order only website. So for now, we're just going to leave the original drop targets in it. They look good enough. And as far as underneath the Playfield is concerned, there's still a little bit of work that has to be done down here too. I have to vacuum up the bottom of the cabinet because it's a little bit dirty, especially down in the back. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to get all of the debris out from back there. Everything on the little wood panel down here is okay. I'll just go ahead and vacuum it up a little bit. Everything down here is mechanically working at this point. And on the bottom side of the Playfield, everything mechanically is fine, but I do need to replace the incandescent bulbs with warm white LEDs, which shouldn't be that big of a job. And then I'll also have to repopulate the ball roll tilt with a ball so that can be functional again. So that's basically it. This machine doesn't need a lot in terms of its Playfield and cabinet restoration. So I think we will do the inside of the game first. We'll go ahead and clean it up, replace all of the bulbs, and do everything that needs to be done down here. And then we will work on the actual Playfield side. So let's get started. All right, so now that I've cleaned up the bottom of the cabinet, and I have to say, it is in very, very good condition. I was surprised by how nice it came out after I cleaned up all the dirt. So now that that's done, it is time to replace all of the bulbs on the underside of the playfield with warm white LEDs. Now I'm sure some people are wondering why I'm upgrading these machines to LEDs in the first place. Why don't I just leave the incandescent bulbs in the machine? And I know that electromechanical machines in particular do have a little bit more charm with the incandescent bulbs just because it looks original. But the whole reason I'm upgrading to warm white LEDs is to prolong the life of the machine. The incandescent bulbs draw a lot more heat than LEDs do, so over time what can happen is it can cause the playfield inserts to sink a little bit, so the playfield won't be 100% flat and smooth anymore. It can cause playfield plastics to warp, and it can cause the backglass paint to flake. So it's not that I'm ignoring the charm that the incandescent bulbs bring, it's because there's only a finite number of these machines left. I want to upgrade it to LEDs just so I can extend its life to the fullest it possibly can be. And I'm choosing to upgrade to warm white LEDs because I want to keep the original warm appearance of the machine. So what I'm going to be doing is removing all of the bulbs and cleaning out all of the playfield inserts because they're a little bit dirty. You can see inside of the inserts where the bulbs are, there's a little bit of dirt. Not too much in this machine. When I restored my Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the light lenses were super dirty. I had to spend hours cleaning each individual one because they're so filthy. But this machine's not very bad. You can see not a ton of dirt. So it'll be a much quicker job than I did on the Close Encounters. So it should go pretty quickly because this machine doesn't have an absolute ton of lights underneath the playfield. So shouldn't take very long, but I'm gonna go ahead and get that done, and I will show you what it looks like after the under playfield lights have been swapped to warm white LEDs. All right, I got all the light bulbs changed out with warm white LEDs. You can see it looks quite a bit brighter under here. And I also went ahead and put a brand new ball in the ball roll tilt right there, but I think it's the wrong size because it doesn't want to stay in there very well. So what I think I'll do is just take out the metal piece for the ball roll tilt and just bend it in a little bit so that it's more secure, but that's something I'll just do off camera. So let's go ahead and put the playfield down and see what the under playfield lights look like. And as you can see, those lights are definitely much brighter and they do a better job at lighting up the entirety of the light lenses. So now it is time to work on the playfield. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is basically stripping everything down. This is going to be a mostly bare playfield by the time I'm done with it. And that will allow me to clean it up and give it a coat of wax, and then we can do the rest of the work that we need to do to it. So let's go ahead and get this playfield all disassembled. So at this point, I am almost done taking things off the playfield. What I'm going to do next is take off all of these metal pieces for the ball trough and clean this out, because look at how much filth was under that apron. Pretty nasty. But as far as the playfield is concerned, I have basically everything off that I want to take off. I'm going to leave the flippers on because they're just fine. They don't need any work. So this is what it looks like after the playfield has been mostly stripped down. You can see we have a lot of filth up toward the top where those metal pieces were. And you can see it says Jungle Queen 398. Jungle Princess, I can't see what the number is. Jungle Princess was the 2-player version of this game. So this is the 4-player, so it's the Jungle Queen. Jungle Princess was $3.99, so it's in sequential order. So I'm going to go ahead and unscrew the rest of these metal pieces here that are underneath the apron for the ball trough. I'll go ahead and clean it up and I'll screw them back in, because after that I don't have to do any work under the apron, so it's just less stuff to keep track of. All right, so I've done the first initial pass over the playfield. You can see underneath the apron looks way better. And it's not really gonna come across well on camera, but just vacuuming the playfield got a lot of dirt off. So in person, it definitely looks a lot cleaner. So that's what that looks like now. Vacuumed up all the filth there up on the top. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and remove this blue bumper so we can replace it with a brand new one. So to remove one of these Gottlieb pop bumpers, there's just a couple flathead screws in there, and that will loosen this up. But I'm also going to have to go underneath the playfield to remove the light socket, because you have to remove that in order for the bumper to come free. So let's go underneath the playfield and see how we can remove that. Well, it looks like this pop bumper has already been worked on, because you can see 2 of its screws are missing. The other ones have their screws. So obviously this bumper was taken apart at some point in this machine's life. So it looks like we just have to remove this one screw, since these 2 are missing, and then this metal piece can come out. So I'll go ahead and remove that, and we'll see if we can get to those wires any easier. You know what? I don't actually think I have to remove this, because this wire has some slack in it. So what I think I can do is just cut it, solder it back together, and put some heat shrink on it. And then for this one, I can actually desolder it from this end, because it's soldered to this light socket here. So I think I can just cut that wire and desolder that one, and then I can pull the light socket out, and then that'll allow me to just unscrew the bumper cap and pull it right off. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and we'll see if my theory is correct. Well, I was able to remove it, but I had to get mildly destructive in order to do it. For the most part, I was correct that I had to just desolder and cut the wire, and then that light socket would be free. But when I was trying to pull the cap off, there's this little white piece down here at the bottom, and the wires weren't able to travel through that because the solder on the wires made it too big, so I wasn't able to just pull it straight off. So what I ended up doing is I pulled it out to the farthest point where I could actually pull it, and then I used a wire cutter to trim just a little bit of the leads on the light socket. So I cut this just a little bit. I'll still be able to reuse it. And then I was able to get the rest of the wires and the sheathing off, and I was able to pull, where did I put it? And then I was able to pull the bumper cap off and take the light socket out after I cut the wires off of it. So that's kind of a painful process, so good thing I only had to do it on one bumper. So you can see we have the old one on the left and the new one from Marco Specialties on the right. So what I need to do is, when installing the light socket, I need to keep in mind how much solder I use, because I am going to have the wires be able to go through those two little holes, I believe it's these two, so that I can actually get the bumper cap on. And as you can see, I have all that stuff just sitting in the bottom of the cabinet here. So I'm planning on reusing both of those wires, but instead of using this little sheathing that Gottlieb put over the wires, I'm just going to put a little bit of heat shrink on the wire just so it's a little bit smaller and I can get it in the bumper assembly easier. All right, well, you can see what I've done here. I've gone ahead and put the light socket into the new bumper housing, and I soldered the two wires to the light socket leads, and I put some of the thinnest heat shrink I had on those wires, and that should absolutely be thin enough to fit through the two holes on the Playfield, because that heat shrink is thinner than the original wire sheaths that Gottlieb used. So that should fit, and then what I'll do is I'll just solder this wire back to where it went. It just soldered to a light socket. And then this wire I cut, so I'll solder that back to the part that's still in the Playfield, and I'll put some heat shrink over that, and the bumper should be nice and good again. All right, it is back in now, and the going in was a lot easier than the coming out. So I put the bumper cap on, and those wires went right on through. You can see the heat shrink that I put on the other side just sticking out right there. And on this side, you can see it right there. So you can see it went through those two little holes on the other white piece on the top of the Playfield. So for this wire, I got the other end out, the pair of pliers, and I soldered it back to this wire and put some heat shrink on it. I put the staple back in, and the other wire I brought back down to the light socket, and this wire could not have been any shorter. It was kind of hard to get that to reach there, but I got it to reach, and I got a nice solid connection there, and it's tight enough to where I don't need to put the staple back in. You can see the original staple was way over here. This wire's tight, so the light socket is not going to go anywhere. So that is the new bumper replaced. And with the game running, this is what it looks like. I put an LED in it to test it and see if it works, and it does. You can see we have a nice new bumper housing now and a nice new cap that's not broken and doesn't have the paint coming off the top. So that is what she looks like. All right, so the next thing on the to-do list is to clean out the drop target assemblies. You can see on this side here, I've already went ahead and done that. You can see how nice and clean the bottoms of those drop targets are. I went ahead and disassembled this entire mechanism here, and it's kind of a pain in the butt just because it's so over-engineered. You can see on this side, the drop targets are still very dirty, filled with grease, and they all need to be cleaned out. So I'm going to go through how to take one of these Gottlieb drop target assemblies apart, and I'll go ahead and clean it up and make it look just as nice as this one. So the way these drop target assemblies are held into the Playfield is by these brackets here. There are two on this side and two on the other side. But it's a lot more involved than just removing those 4 screws, because you also have to disassemble the drop target assembly by removing each of the metal pieces, one here in the back, one here, and then the other one on the other side. And so you can see that there are screws here that hold in the metal pieces. This screw goes into this piece here, and same with this one here, and then these 2 screws hold on this piece. And it's exactly the same on the other side. There's 4 screws that hold in the pieces on that side as well. But there are also 10 different springs that you have to remove when you're taking this assembly apart. You can see each drop target has a spring going from itself to the little metal lever assembly that brings the drop target up and down. And then there are 5 more springs on this back metal piece. You can see they attach right there, and they go to another spot on that same lever. So you can see how both of those springs are attached. So there's a total of 10 springs. So as you can see, it's a pretty involved assembly, but you don't have to remove absolutely everything in order to service the drop targets. So I'll go through it and I'll show you how to take this apart. So what I want to do first is remove the 2 screws that secure the brackets to the underside of the playfield, and then I want to remove the 4 screws here so I can take this outer metal piece with the 5 switches off. So for this piece, when you take the last screw out, you want to pull down and then out, because this piece also has the playfield switch that's behind the drop targets. Just want to pull that out, and then you can kind of you can see how dirty it is in here. Just kind of let this hang down here. And so now with the backside of the drop targets exposed, you can see just how dirty they are. They should be white, and they're almost black because of the amount of grease that's on them. And so when you're putting this mechanism back together, you'll want to have this rear piece off so that you can get in here to put the 5 springs on the back piece back in. That's the way I found was easiest. You can see those springs right there. So that's what that looks like. So let's go ahead and keep taking it apart. And so now we have to take this back piece off. So that's going to be these 2 screws right here. And then you'll also have to go in here and remove each of the 5 springs that go from the back piece to the little metal lever that the drop targets go through. And it's going to be easier to remove those springs if you have the drop targets down, because they're not pulled as tight. So definitely have those down. And when you're doing the springs, take them off from the part where they're attached to the metal lever. Don't do it from the back, because it'll be a lot harder to get on. And it's actually going to be a little easier now that the springs are out with the drop targets up. I'll show you why in a second, but we'll put these up and we'll remove the screws, because once you remove the screw, you're going to have to push the drop targets through the holes so that this piece can come out. Like that, and then this piece is free because the springs were taken off. You can see we have each of the 5 springs right there. So that's why it's easier to do it from the inner position, so that the springs will just stay right there. And so that's what that looks like with that piece off. And so now what you want to do is put the drop targets back down, and you can do this one by one. You can see the spring, when it goes down, has less tension on it. And so you can pull those springs off now, but you want to leave it attached to the drop target. So take it off from the side on the metal lever, because it is very hard to get those springs back into the little clip on the back of the drop targets there. That is definitely something you want to do while you have the drop targets out. So I'll go ahead and pull each of those springs off, and we'll keep going with taking this assembly apart. And so with those 5 springs off, you can see now the drop targets are very loose, but they can't come out yet because we have to remove the last remaining metal pieces. So there are 4 screws left. There's 2 for the other 2 brackets that screw into the bottom of the playfield, and then there's 2 screws that hold in the metal piece that's back here closest to the playfield. So go ahead and remove those, and we'll take off this side piece and then the back piece. So actually what you want to do before you start removing those screws is put the drop targets down. That way you can take them out of the little metal levers. They just stick right through the middle of the drop target, and there's enough room for you to remove them out of those. So now they'll really be loose, but we still have to remove the last 2 metal pieces so that we can access the drop targets themselves. And so the reason I'm removing the screws that go right into the playfield is so I can lift the assembly out a little bit and get better access to the 2 screws that go into the metal pieces. So I'll go ahead and remove all 4 of those. And so now this is the part where it kind of becomes a pain in the butt. because not only is this going to be the hard part when putting it back together, now you have to keep track of actually four different things. You have to keep track of both of the metal pieces and both of the little metal brackets, and you have to make sure that they don't fall down into the playfield, because now after taking out these two screws, the whole assembly is free. So you want to hold on to it now. This probably isn't the best way to do it, but this is the way I'm doing it. So now that it's free, go ahead and remove the last two screws on those brackets, and then the metal pieces will separate. Okay, so now those pieces are free, so go ahead and remove that. And so there is the piece with the drop targets. We'll take a look at that here in a sec. And so at this point, you can just leave this piece here. You don't have to do any more disassembly because you have a lot of access now to clean everything. And so all we're left with now is this. One metal piece that the drop targets are situated in. And you can see just how dirty the front side of the drop targets are. That's pretty extreme filth. And you can see inside this piece, this is where the drop targets would be when they were down. They're literally just sitting inside all this dirt and grease on this metal piece. So to take the drop targets out of this piece, you do have to remove the springs from the targets because they will not slide through with the springs in place. So that's the last thing you have to do, just remove the springs from the drop targets and then they will pull straight out. And so there are the drop targets all by themselves. So that is the process you have to go through to get Gottlieb drop targets out of your machine. And you can see the grease is almost up to the point where the ball hits the target at. So there's definitely a lot of buildup on these targets. They have never been taken out or cleaned ever. And then here are the insides of these two metal pieces. This is the one that had the targets in it. You can see how gross and disgusting that is. And here's the back one with the springs. And in terms of the playfield, you can see we have a lot of that grease just built up there. So I'm going to go ahead and clean all that off. Here's the inside of this piece. It's not horribly dirty, but it's definitely got some grease in it, so I'll be cleaning that up. And then here is this piece. You can see there's a lot of dirt buildup on this as well. So now comes the cleanup process. I'm gonna go ahead and clean up all these metal pieces, get all the old grease off, clean up the underside of the playfield here, clean up the metal pieces there, clean up the springs, the drop targets, and just make everything look as good as it can be once again. It's going to be a night and day difference, and you'll see that it is absolutely worth it to do this process. It makes everything look so much better. Well, somehow I forgot to record the video of the results of the drop target assembly cleaning, but I took some pictures, and as you can see, I got those drop targets to look like they're in almost brand new condition, except for the wear where the ball has hit them over the years. I also went ahead and cleaned up all of the metal pieces, both the ones I took out and the ones still in the playfield. I wiped out all of the grease that had accumulated on the bottom of the playfield, and so at that point I was ready to put the drop target assembly back together, doing the reverse of what I showed you earlier. All right, the left drop target assembly is all back together now. You can see all that buildup of grease is basically completely gone. Looks much cleaner now. A few pointers for when you're putting this mechanism back together. When you're putting on the back piece, you want to make sure that this arm, this is the one that resets the drop targets, it's attached to the reset coil. You want to make sure that these two screws here are situated below the arm because they act as a stopping point. As you can see, I made the mistake when putting the right drop target assembly back together that I had the arm below the screws, so it was completely stuck. It wouldn't move at all. So make sure that the screws are below this arm. And one thing I did just to make sure that the reset mechanism was nice and smooth is when this arm goes to reset the drop targets, you can see it pushes against all of the metal levers that are attached to the drop targets. Well, on my drop target assemblies, on both of them, there's a little bit of wear on those arms right there. So they've been reset quite a few times. I went ahead and put a little bit of dielectric grease on that wear point on each of the arms, just to make sure that when this goes up and resets, that it does it nice and smooth. So that's another thing that you can do. And the other thing you want to keep track of is the alignment of the drop target assembly itself, and that is done with each of the 4 brackets that hold it into the playfield. You can see on this side of the bracket, there's a little divot here, and it's like that on every bracket. That divot goes into the metal piece, so this part of each bracket is self-aligning, but once you get the entire mechanism in place and you have the wood screws back in, you want to make sure you have the alignment just right, because if you don't, when the drop targets go down, you can see that one went down perfectly. The drop targets can rub against the wood and they won't go down as easy. So you can see I have it aligned to where they go down nice and fast. So you want to align it just to make sure that your drop targets are moving the way they should. So that is how you service your Gottlieb drop target assemblies. So now we'll get started on cleaning the rest of the pieces. So here's all the stuff that I took off of the Jungle Queen's playfield. So all of what's on this table still has to be cleaned. You can see some of it looks okay, some of it's dirtier than others. Here's all the smaller pieces that I took off. I've kept all the screws together so I know where they go. And of course I took a lot of pictures, so I'll be able to get the machine back together no problem. You can see there are a lot of dark bulbs that came out of it. There are even a couple LEDs. So I'm going to definitely save those. I'm going to save all of the bulbs that are not dark and that are working. In terms of the rubbers, about half of them are good. The other half are going to go in the trash. So like this one here, not cracked at all, just a little dirty. This can be a good spare after I clean it up. But ones like this, it doesn't go back into its circular shape anymore. It's starting to crack. So those kind of rubbers are going to go into the garbage. And I'm going to throw away all of the rubber caps because they're basically as hard as a rock. You can see the original blue bumper cap. Not only was it broken on one side, but some of the paint for the tiger has come off. You can see, comparing it to the red ones, some of the paint's missing. So that's another reason I wanted to replace that. To clean up all the plastics, they're not particularly dirty on this machine, but I'm going to clean them up anyway. You can see the underside of the plastics are not too bad on this machine. Just a little bit of surface dirt on the top, so I'll go ahead and clean those up. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean all of these pieces up, and then we'll be ready to clean off the playfield, give it a coat of wax, and then we can put all the stuff back in the playfield. All right, a couple days of work, and everything here is now all cleaned up. You can see everything looks very nice now. Cleaned off all the dirt and grime off of every piece. You can see the top piece, I got it to look a little bit better. I was able to clean most of that sticker residue off, but not all of it, but that's as good as it needs to be. I think it looks fine. And here are the plastics. They cleaned up very nice. They weren't very dirty to begin with, but now they are nice and shiny. And I also went ahead and replaced these 4 non-jeweled posts with ones that are the correct size and ones that are jeweled. So now all of the playfield posts are the correct ones. So now what we can go ahead and do is start cleaning and waxing the playfield, and then we'll be ready to put all these pieces back in. But before we do that, there are a few finishing touches that I want to do to this machine before I put it back together. And the first one is on the coin door. In part 2, I had went ahead and taken off the old electrical tape that was covering these 2 wires and just put some Scotch tape over it. And these wires are for the coin lockout coil for the lockout mechanism. Now, I can leave it exactly like this and not have a problem. The only thing that that mechanism does is there's supposed to be a little coil that will stay energized while the system is on, and that will allow the coins to pass through. So when the machine is off, it will block the coins from going through the coin rejectors. But it just kind of bugged me that that was missing, because this is a very nice condition machine and I would like it to be complete. So I decided that I would try to track down all of the parts needed to rebuild the coin lockout mechanism. and I was able to find them all. And the only reason that I was able to do that was because of my Gottlieb Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's a year newer than the Jungle Queen, and I did a restoration series on this machine as well. It turned out looking very nice. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch the series I did on this machine. But this is an early solid state machine, so it uses a lot of the parts from the electromechanical machines, and it uses the exact same coin door, and it has a complete coin lockout mechanism on it. So I was able to look at all the parts that were missing on that coin door and go on Marco Specialties and find everything that I needed. So I will show you what you need if you need to rebuild the coin lockout mechanism on one of these later EM and early solid state style coin doors. So my coin door is complete in every other way except for the coin lockout mechanism. So if you have a coin door that is in the same state as this one, here's what you need in order to rebuild the coin lockout mechanism. First thing is the actual coil. It is part number A16890. All right, minor correction. This is the coil that's designed for a solid state machine. The one designed for electromechanical machines is part A11058. I end up realizing this later on in the video, but all the rest of the parts are identical between the two machines, and they install in the exact same way. You'll need 2 of these coin lockout wire brackets, part A11637. They look like that. And in my case, I only need 1 because the other one is still here on this side. But if that's missing, then you will need to order 2. You need the relay housing that the coil goes into, part A557. The relay armature plate, this is the part that will move back and forth when the coil gets energized. It's part 13660. The coin lockout actuator rod, this is the large rod that holds all of the coin lockout pieces. It's part B15103. And then you need the coin lockout wires. You need 2 of those. These are the wires that will actually block the coins. So that is part A11640. And then as far as the screws and the clips and all of the other little pieces that you need, I was able to find all of that at my local Ace Hardware. So in here I have all of the screws, the lock washers, a couple springs, and some clips, just everything that you need to actually mount the hardware. So I'll go into more detail once we start rebuilding the assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and unpack all these pieces and we can go ahead and get started. So first I'll go ahead and put this coin bracket on, and these are the screws that I found. They're a little bit longer than the originals, but they will still fit. And I got a couple lock washers because that's what the originals have. And the screws that I bought are Phillips screws. The originals are flathead, so it's going to look a little bit different, but it doesn't really matter to me. It's inside the machine, so it's not like you're going to see it. And those screws are screwing in the original threads perfectly. All right, so there's that. So now it'll be easier to actually start mounting the rest of the pieces. All right, so now we're going to prepare the relay housing. We have to bend this part that's sticking out a little bit. You can see in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, this is the relay housing, and you see how this part is bent in so that the relay plate here pushes up against it. So that is what will make it stop when the coil de-energizes. You can see how that works. So we have to bend this to be in the same position as that. But before bending it, I would recommend putting the relay plate in first because it's much easier to get it in when it's like this. So that is how it goes in, just like that. So now that that's in, we can go ahead and bend this piece in. So about like that, you can see how big the gap is. That's about how much you want to bend it. And I compared it to the Close Encounters, and it looks basically exactly the same. So that is prepared now. But you're also going to need a little spring to go between here on the relay plate and here on the relay housing. And this is the spring I chose to use that I found at my Ace Hardware, and is roughly the same size as the original Gottlieb spring. So that will go on here and on here so that it'll spring back, just like that. So now I'll go ahead and mount the coil into that assembly. And this might actually be a new old stock coil because it's got the Gottlieb part number on the label there. And on the back of it, you can see we have the Gottlieb part number. And this looks identical to the one that's in my Close Encounters. So I don't know if Marco has a supply of new old stock Gottlieb coils still, but this is what I got. But one thing you want to do is if you have an electromechanical game, you want to remove this diode. If it's a solid state game, you want to leave this diode in. So I'll go ahead and remove this diode. So to mount the coil in this assembly, when you look at it with the relay plate facing you, the back of the coil will face you and the lugs will be on the left. So it's going to mount like this. And then there's a screw that will go through here. It'll first go through the bracket here that I just screwed in. So it'll go through there. And then it will go through here, and that's out of focus, and into the coil. So I'm going to be using the same screw and lock washer that I used for screwing in that new bracket that you saw earlier. And that is what that looks like for reference. So on this piece, these two little divots will go into the two holes on this bracket here, so it'll fit in nice and snug. And so that is how the coil mounts. The two lugs face inward to the coin door and are on the side of the relay plate. The screw goes in right there in the little smaller portion of where the round hole is, and the two little divots go in those holes right there. So that is how the coil mounts into the coin door. And you'll notice at this point that the relay plate is very loose. That'll get fixed as we start putting some more parts in. So now what we can go ahead and do is, since that coil is firmly in place, I can go ahead and undo what I did in part 2, take all this tape off and solder these wires to the coil. All right, so that is connected now. So the only things we have to do now are the two coin lockout wires and the big metal rod and all of the clips that hold those things in. So what I'm going to do first is put the coin lockout wires through because they have to go through the rod and you have to put the wires in first so that can happen. So it matters which way the rod goes in because on the rod itself, let's see if I can get it to focus on it. You can kind of see it. There's little indentations on the rod for the C-clips that get put on, and you can see this end, there's a good amount of space before the first set of indentations. And on this end, they're right at the edge. And the side that has them right at the edge goes where the coil is, so it will go in this direction. But we have to put the coin wires in first. And when you put these wires in, you see they have a little bend at the top. The bend will face the right, so it'll go like that. So the wires go through this tiny little hole right here. So I'm going to have to kind of bend it a little bit to get it to fit through there. So it'll go just like that. And then this part of it will go in the hole as well. That'll kind of keep it in so that it doesn't come out. So it'll go just like that. And I'm looking inside the coin mechanism and it is going in the exact right spot. I'll show you that once I get the other wire put in and the rod through. This one is going to go through this other hole right here, and then this will clip in inside the hole, just like I did the other one, just like that. So those actually stay in pretty well on their own. And now we can fit the rod through, so it's going to go through the little spring part on the lockout wires, through the relay housing, through the relay plate. Well, it's not fitting through the relay plate like it should, so I might have to drill that hole just a little bit bigger. All right, there we go. After drilling this out just a little bit, this fits right on through now, and it is nice and firm in there still. So you might need to do that if you get this relay plate from Marco. But then, once you get this through, you're going to put it through the other coin lockout wire. and into the other bracket. So just like that. So in terms of the clips that hold everything in on the coin lockout mechanism, I was able to find the right-sized C-clips to hold things in, but I couldn't find cotter keys that looked exactly like this. These are what the originals look like. And the ones I found at my Ace Hardware look like that, but they're so similar, I think they're gonna work just fine. So that is what I'm going to use. So here's my Close Encounters coin door, and the way this works is there are two C-clips that hold the coin lockout wire in so it doesn't go anywhere, and it's like that on both sides. And there are two cotter keys that hold the top side of the relay plate, so that is where those go. If you had a third chute, there would probably be two C-clips and a coin lockout wire here as well, but we don't have that, so that is what we are going to do on the Jungle Queen. And those C-clips and cotter keys fit on there perfectly. So now when this moves, everything moves with it. But I do notice that the spring that I bought for the relay assembly is not quite springy enough. But luckily I did buy a smaller spring in anticipation of that. I bought this spring, a little bit smaller. So I'll go ahead and put that on and see if it improves it. And yes, that is much better. Now it actually springs back. It's a little more firm than the original spring, but we'll go ahead and see if it works. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug the machine in. We'll turn it on and we'll see if that coil energizes. But first I'm gonna show you where those coin lockout wires go when they're inside the coin mechanism. If I go ahead and manually energize the coil, you can kind of see them right there. They go into a little hole that's in the actual coin rejector, and they are both in the exact right spot. So that is how it should be. And you can kind of see the one on the other side there, but it looks like I'm gonna have to bend that one out because it is not coming out far enough when I push the relay assembly in. So I'm gonna have to bend that one out, but let's go ahead and plug the machine in and see if it actually works. Okay, the machine is plugged in, so I'm gonna hit the power switch and the coils should energize. It did not. Oh, actually, yes it is. I can feel it. I think the spring is a little bit too firm. I'm gonna go ahead and put the other spring back in. All right, let's try that again. Okay, well that's a little better. It went in, but it is still having issues. Maybe this spring's a little bit too loose. Because if I hold it in, it's working fine. Yeah, it doesn't want to spring back out. So I think I'm going to have to get an in-between size spring. All right, what I'm going to do for a test, I took the spring from the Close Encounters and put it on there. So let's see how that works. Now that's even worse. Okay, so it looks like I have some investigation to do to see why that isn't acting right. So I'll come back once I find something out. All right, so I found multiple things. The relay plate I had on backwards, so I went ahead and turned that around. The spring was a little bit too loose, so I made that a little tighter. But perhaps the most important thing is this is the incorrect coil. Turns out that this one is only meant for Gottlieb solid state games that use this style coin door, and I didn't know that. I assumed they were all the same. So I went ahead and ordered the correct coil for electromechanical machines, and I'll wait for that to get here and we'll see if it works. So for now, I went ahead and desoldered the two wires going to that coil so the mechanism won't turn on and buzz. So let's move on to the next little thing I want to do. And that is the end of the power cord. You can see it was not done correctly at all. In part one, when I plugged this machine in for the first time, there was a bunch of electrical tape wrapped around here, and I assumed it was just because someone soldered wires right there, but no, it's just because they cut the main sheath too much. So as it is right now, if I were to pull it like this, I'm directly putting pressure on the screw terminals right on the plug, and that's not ideal. So I'm going to go ahead and fix this, and I'm actually going to replace the plug end because, as you can see, it's quite large, and I was able to find one that was a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And here's the one I found. You can see not quite as big. I think it looks a little more clean. This one's easier to service as well. If I take the screw out of it, you can just open it right up. So it's really easy to set up. The other one, there was a couple clips that you had to remove with a screwdriver, so it wasn't as easy to get into. So I'm going to go ahead and strip those wires down a bit, and we'll go ahead and install the new plug end. So this new plug is not polarized, and neither was the old one, but we're still going to wire it up correctly. So looking at the wires here, it's not going to focus on them, but you can see we have a black, white, and green. The black is the hot, the white is the neutral, and the green is ground. And so the hot is going to get wired up to this pin, the neutral to this pin, and the ground to here. So I got it wired just like that, with the wires going in the direction of tightening the screw. So now we can go ahead and close it up and put the screw in that hole. And there's our new plug. Looks way better than it did before, and I like this end. It's a lot nicer looking. So there we go. That's done. And the last little thing I want to do before we start tackling the Playfield is replace a bad light bulb socket in the back box. I showed it in part 2, but I'm going to go ahead and replace it with a new one. I went ahead and I bought myself a lift cart so I can actually lift these machines out and not have to use little casters on the legs like I was using before. I even did the handle modification, so if I pull these little pins out, you can see the handle goes up and down, where previously the cart did not do that. So it lets me push that in the machine so I can raise it up and pull the machine out. And so I have a couple of these pieces of wood going on the cart so that when it pushes up the machine, it doesn't push up on the directly in the bottom panel, it does it on the sides so that I don't break the bottom panel. And I'm not really a fan of working on a pinball machine while it's raised up on a cart like that, so I went ahead and lowered it down, so now it's on the ground, so now I know for sure it's not going to go anywhere. So the light socket that I need to replace is this one here, because as you can see, the back spring is completely missing. You can see these two light sockets have the spring, but this one is completely missing. So I'm going to have to go ahead and replace that socket, because without that spring, the LED won't light up because it can't make the connection between here and this wire. So I'm going to go ahead and desolder that light socket and put a brand new one in its place. All right, I went ahead and replaced that light socket and put a warm white LED in it. So now you can see the title of the machine is actually lit uniformly. Before there was a little dark spot here because there was no LED in that socket. So that's fixed. I also went ahead and put a little coat of dielectric grease on the player unit contacts just to make sure that it was rotating smoothly. And I'm going to do the same to the bonus unit underneath the Playfield because I might as well make sure that it's actually moving good. So now we can go ahead and start cleaning up, waxing the Playfield, and putting it all back together. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up all the remaining dirt off this Playfield. Then I'll give it a couple coats of wax, and then we can put the LED lighting in it and put all the pieces back together. And I'm also going to clean the rails that the glass slides into because they are very filthy and I don't want the glass sliding around in dirt. And after I'm finished doing all that, Jungle Queen will be completely done and ready to play once again. So sit back and relax as I go ahead and restore this Playfield. And so the last things left are warm white LEDs and a rubber kit. And then we can go ahead and put the rest of the pieces back on. Couple little things worth mentioning here. In this top piece, I had to replace two missing screws. You can see they're Phillips screws, but they look basically just like the original flatheads. There's another one right there. So those have been replaced. This is a new rebound rubber. And on this piece that the glass slides up against in the back, I replaced the foam with two Velcro pieces like I did before because the original foam had degraded. And so this completes the restoration series on this 1977 Gottlieb Jungle Queen. The only issue that I still have to fix on it is the coin lockout mechanism. I'm still waiting for that coil to arrive, but I imagine when it does, I can just solder it straight in and that mechanism will energize and de-energize nice and strong. So I don't think I'm going to have any issues with that. But the rest of the machine looks very nice now, and it is now ready for its second life. It's ready to have some plays put on it. So thank you all for watching. I'm going to go ahead and include some gameplay at the end of the video if you want to see this machine in action. So if you're interested, continue watching to the very end. But thank you for watching this restoration series, and I will see you in my next video.